NewFilmmakers Los Angeles in partnership with Movie Maker magazine. I'm Carolyn McDonald, and I'm here with Marissa Chibás and her film, A Cuban Documemory. Let's take a look at it.
I've just turned 13. I'm holding a Super 8 camera, filming for the first time. My little sister Dee Dee walks towards me with my mother, Dalia, by her side. Behind them is my father, Raúl, who decides to take a picture of me filming them. Dueling cameras.
Marissa, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
I'm glad you're here with us. So for people who haven't seen A Cuban Documemory, tell us a little bit about the film, what it's about.
So it's basically my reflections on my travels to Cuba since 1993. I've been at least 7 or 8 times. And I did this in collaboration with Aisa Santizo, who is a Cuban artist who currently is based in Madrid. And it's my particular perspective on Cuba as the daughter of an exiled Cuban revolutionary leader. My father co-wrote the 1957 Manifesto of the Cuban Revolution with Felipe Pasos and Fidel Castro. And my mother, who was runner-up Miss Cuba, 1959. So I've been calling it a visual memoir of my reflections on Cuba. And then also Aisa, who is a young, couple of decades younger than me, visual artist, and this film is very much a bridge between us, a conversation between us.
It's so lush and so rich. There's so many layers of so many things going on. I don't even know where to start. I guess maybe start with the journey of the film itself. I mean, when did you start production, research, all that? What was that like in scope?
It's interesting because the footage from 1993, which was on those old VHS cameras, and so you can see that with the quality. It's got that really grainy quality to it. But I was doing I was there to make a documentary about my uncle, who was a Cuban revolutionary leader. He was the front runner for the 1952 Cuban presidency. And he had a weekly radio show, and legend has it that you could walk down any street in Cuba on Sundays at 8 p.m. and hear his voice because everyone was tuned in. And he was giving one Sunday a very impassioned speech that ended with the words, "Wake up, Cuba, wake up. This is the last knock on your door." And then he shot himself as a suicidal act. He died 10 days later. So he was the figure I was going to Cuba initially to learn about my ancestors, to learn about him, and I was the first person in my family to go back. A few days later, my sister followed with her mother, and other family members came. So I kind of opened the door, and then a lot of my family ended up going there and having a similar journey. So I had this footage. It was pandemic time. I'd been wanting to do something with my recent travels to Cuba. I presented work there with Aisa Santizo in 2017 at Fábrica de Arte in La Habana.
Right, that was at the gallery, the installation, which is beautiful.
So I thought, oh, I have all this material. If there's a pandemic, I can't go and shoot anything. Maybe Aisa and I can come together and build something together. And I had done this play, Daughter of a Cuban Revolutionary, that I started at the Red Cat Theater. It was the premiere like 13, 14 years ago. And the last presentation of it was at the Goodman Theater in Chicago in 2019, just before. So it was a long journey of telling these stories, mostly about my father and my uncle. So I wanted to do something that honored my mother and also reflected on this search for home, which seems to be a big theme in my life and my work. And I think for a lot of, I'm first generation, I think a lot of immigrants have that search for home kind of theme running.
Right, and so the cultures too, you know, and I like what you talked about. You know, you started with your uncle and then shifting it over to your mother and the journey of women, which was so interesting. Talk about that a little more, and especially, you know, the mango tree, you know, the issues that, you know, the thing that happened with the women there. Can you elaborate on that? That was so fascinating to me, and how you tied that together with your mother's journey and your grandmother.
Yeah, so my father had told me this story about when he was in the Sierra Maestra Mountains fighting, that there was a part of the Sierra called Mango de las Mujeres. And it's, the story is that what happened was that the Cuban women were hung and burned alive by those mango trees when they were fighting for independence against Spain. So it was this sacred space, and I just thought, wow. Most of the Cubans I've talked to and I've told that story said, I never knew that, I never heard that story. I think women's place in history is often erased.
Especially in revolutions.
Especially in revolutions, and that's true with several of the Cuban revolutionary, more recent Cuban, from the 1959 revolutionary leaders as well. But, and then my great-grandmother, Luisa Agramonte, she fought the way a woman at that time could, right? She sewed flags, she helped pay for munitions, she housed soldiers. She was a great advocate and activist for an independent Cuba.
Even now, the evolution, I think of yourself, you know, and your associate, you know, quote unquote, fighting with the arts, you know, and choosing to tell your story through theater. And talk about that installation again for people that, again, haven't seen the film yet. I love the speech you did of your Uncle Eddie, and tell people how you juxtaposed that performance against the recording of that speech in that space.
Right, so I have the recording of his final speech when I don't have those last words because he went overtime and they cut him off at the radio station, but there was a written document of his final words, but I have that speech. And so when Aisa and I first came together to be part of this installation, we decided to make that speech our common ground. And Aisa's grandmother had been a follower of my uncle's. So it was a place where we could meet. We were looking for, what's the meeting place? At that time, she was a Cuban artist, 27, I think, years old when we worked together that first time, based in Cuba. Here I am from Los Angeles, born in New York. and a lot of the laws, both from Cuba and from the United States, make our coming together very difficult. And we wanted to come together. And both she and I are people who really believe in that and the importance of that, of creating bridges.
Right, absolutely.
Rather than walls. And so, the installation was we were both creating videos that we would reflect on opposite walls on our reflecting on that final speech, and we were playing the speech in the installation. So she had different footage of places where my uncle had been in Cuba. I had footage of the Women's March of 2017, and another section where I was unearthing family photographs from the sand and placing them kind of like tombs. So that was what we decided to do. That was our meeting ground, was my uncle's final speech.
Right, right. And you wove it together so beautifully, I mean, with the colors and the layers again. So, and now that you're talking about the generations between the two of you and the cultural, you know, her being in Cuba, you being Los Angeles, New York born, how, when you got these materials together, talk about how you chose to use these, you know, two different mediums, you know, of film, video, as well as the cultures. How did you choose which to pick, which to use and which not to use in the course of that?
It was about a year-long process of she and I meeting via Zoom and exchanging materials via WeTransfer, and we really we knew, I was very fortunate and knew that I wanted to do this with Aissa in part because she's a visual artist.
Right.
And although she had made a lot of installations, this kind of a documentary was something new. And so she had a certain way of seeing things that I really appreciated and loved. I think she's an extraordinary artist. I'm very lucky to be working with her. And so there were ways in which I could see, as even in our initial edits, that the way she was weaving things together felt really right. We did have a section of the film that towards the end, we had a section of film of Cuban artists in the United States and Cuba who have defied the restrictions of both countries to come together and work in dance and music and theater and visual art. And once we saw it, it was tonally so different, and we thought, this is another film, which I hoped to be able to make. So there was a process of figuring out tonally what makes sense, and because this does have a lot of dreamlike kind of quality, reflection, memory, you know, the way memory is not perfectly focused, we knew we had to stay in that area. And the footage of '93 really worked very well, but even the 2017 footage that we used, she created a texture for it so that it felt like the older footage.
Yeah,
and then we had very, very fortunate and honored to have the great Bobby Céspedes. One of her albums, Mujer y Cantante, she let us use 3 of her songs from that. And to me, that elevated the film. Once her music was in there, it just rose to another level. And then another composer, Cuban, Adela Chibás, composed this beautiful music for us. So in many ways, it was a collaboration of Cuban women, right? Coming together, and different generations. We're all different generations.
And again, something you said of showing Cuba in a way that isn't that quote unquote romanticized, you know, that most Americans in the Western world, you know, I think there was a quote in the film where Cuba, forgive me if I'm misquoting you, but to the something like Cuba is the world's mistress and everybody comes there for that.
That's the gist of it, and that was from a quote from National Geographic from 1933 about she can be anything you want her to be, right? And that's been very much the way people see Cuba, right? She's there for you to have fun, to have your pleasure. And even I think I'm critical myself of how I've seen Cuba. I've seen there's a romanticization I have about Cuba as well, and I have to resist that all the time in myself, and that's one of the reasons why collaborating with contemporary Cubans, people living there today or who recently lived there, is really important to me, so that I don't fall into that trap. Right.
Where do you think that came from with you to have that? Because and it's part of, how do I ask this question? It's like you saying now that you may have a romantic view of that, but at the same time you want to create or tell a story and give a view that's not that romance. And there's so many complex issues, and we could be here hours talking about the complexities of Cuban history and all of that. But your view, you know, not being romanticized of it, but, you know, your view and your experience. Talk about that kind of dance between.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think Aissa grounds me.
Okay.
She grounds me, and she doesn't let me go there.
Okay.
And I think that's been very helpful. And then I also have learned to check myself about that. But I grew up, you know, my mother would just wistfully look away and say, "Ay, Varadero Beach. There's no beach in the world with the sands of Varadero," you know. And so going to Varadero was like, I'm going to Mecca. I'm going to this place that is, you know, and it was pretty beautiful. And I do feel there are things I feel in Cuba that I don't feel anywhere else. There is the air, the people, I mean, it's very moving to me, but it's a double-edged sword because it's a place I've been threatened multiple times.
Wow,
there.
really? Yeah,
And,
I remember
even my exit of Cuba last time was a very pointed threat, which makes me wonder whether I can return, and that's painful.
Right, right. And I was going to ask you about that too, being on the plane. I mean, what did you think would have happened to you if you'd have gotten off that plane when they...
I think I would have been detained for a few hours. Many of my friends have been detained. I don't think anything else would have happened, you know, but it still is something that, especially not having any kind of ambassador there, which at the last time I was there we had, you know, nothing. We had cut diplomatic ties, so one feels particularly vulnerable. But honestly, that's nothing compared to what Cuban artists have to deal with there. I mean, they're so courageous, they're so brave. The people who started protesting and going out in the streets July 11th, I have tremendous admiration for them and respect, and hope to support in any way I can by talking about Cuba and breaking some of those illusions about how perfect and wonderful a paradise it is. It's very, you know, there's literally a law that says that you cannot make art that is not approved by the government.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, that's
still right now?
Oh, right now to this day. And that's one of the reasons Cuban artists, many are asking people not to attend the Biennale this year. And there's a lot of really brave artists who are out there for the first time in decades. Really, they've been imprisoned, incarcerated. I mean, it's a pretty difficult situation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, wow, I had no idea that it's still going on today, especially being freed up, Americans at least, it's freed up to be able to travel, you know, to Cuba.
Those restrictions came back again under Trump, and they've opened up somewhat now. So beginning in mid-November, I've heard travel to Cuba will be allowed. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good, very good. So A Cuban Documemory, your memory, what would you want the audience, us as viewers, to take away from the film, from your memory about the culture and life of Cuba?
Well, I'd love for people to seek out information about Cuba and maybe go beyond the surface and the illusion and the romanticization. I think there's also a big part of the film that asks or is looking for an invitation to search for your own home and what that is. Yeah, I think those are the main things for me, really allowing for complexity, for people to see the complexity of Cuba and that it's not one thing, and also there is, for me, a very spiritual dimension, right? So that invitation for others to seek home and reflect on that is important. And then, of course, honoring my mother. This is dedicated to her, and so I am honoring my mother and the mothers who do not get enough recognition.
Right, beautiful, beautiful. Like I said, I could be here all day talking to you. But I just want to thank you so much for being here and talking with us. It's a great film, and I hope everyone comes, you know, gets to watch it, to see the film.
Thank you. I hope so.